Well, afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Healthy Living Live. I'm Chef AJ, and it is my honor, pleasure, and privilege to interview Dr. Doug Lisle. If you're not familiar with Dr. Lisle, you must get his extraordinary book that he co-wrote called The Pleasure Trap. You might know him from his weekly podcast, which is called Beat Your Genes, spelled Genes. If you're new to his podcast, at least listen to episode 161. He did an episode a few weeks ago where he talked about the pleasure trap and the ego trap, which was probably the best explanation of both that I've ever heard. You can listen to his podcast live every Wednesday evening at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time. And you can also find the replays or even listen to it live on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, Spotify, probably Stitcher by now. He has over 160 wonderful episodes. And where else can you find him? At the McDougall program, where he's the psychologist, at the Live-In program, and at the True North Health Center. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Lisle.
Oh, it's a pleasure, AJ, always.
It's been far too long since we've done one of these live. So if any of you are familiar with the Real Truth About Weight Loss Summit that just took place over 11 days, absolutely free, Dr. Lisle was one of the 34 experts, and I have so many wonderful comments about you. I'm going to take a screenshot, but I'm going to just read this one that came in yesterday from Stephen Turner. He says, Doug Lisle always manages to say something that gives me kind of a gut punch, always worth listening to. So people really loved you. And even though the summit was airing live, the interviews were pre-recorded. So it wasn't like we could just ask the speakers questions in real time. So we have now over 4,500 comments on the page, which obviously I'm not going to ask you, 4,500 questions. But there were a few topics on the summit that many people came forward with some confusion. And I thought maybe you could shed some light on them. So
sure.
We'll start with the first one. So Dr. Garth Davis, who is a well-known plant-based bariatric surgeon in North Carolina, did a wonderful talk. And one of the things he was articulating is that people aren't fat because they eat too much fruit. They're not diabetic because they eat too much fruit. And he's never had a patient come to him for gastric bypass because they ate too many apples. And he started talking about de novo lipogenesis, which is something I learned from Dr. McDougall in his Maximum Weight Loss book, which I talk about in my lecture. And a lot of people were confused. Like they realized that people on the summit weren't all the hyper-conscientious nutcases that find you and me. These are people that this may have been their first entry to this topic or plant-based eating. And so the comments were like, well, I can't believe that I can eat all the fruit I want and not gain weight. I can't believe I can eat all the potatoes I want and lose weight. So people were asking, really, is de novo lipogenesis true? Is it true that human beings really can't convert carbohydrate to protein, and that this way of eating that we recommend is, as Dr. Lawenda said in the summit, almost like a magical buffet of food? Because people were saying, well, can I eat all the dates I want and lose weight? Well, dates are not a whole natural food. They're dried and of a higher caloric density. So I was just wondering if you could touch a little bit on this de novo lipogenesis and assure people that they really can eat a lot this way and not only not gain weight, but lose weight.
Well, let's try to get the basics here. Let's just touch on the basics. The most important issue in weight management is going to be just overall calorie density. That's really the fundamental issue, and it's going to turn out that we now have, I think, probably the first evidence, hardcore evidence, coming from the observation of hunter-gatherers in East Africa, that the average calorie density of those people is 700 calories a pound. So that's, we've been aiming at, we've had previous data, between 550 and 600 that we've been thinking about was probably about right. Looks like we undershot it a little, which is fine. And it's undoubtedly true that throughout the world and world history, there's been a range of calorie densities that given group of peoples has had. That probably it's rarely been much above 700, and it's probably never been as high as 1,000. It might have been, but it would have been rare. So it's going to be that essentially the human digestive satiation mechanisms are going to work really well somewhere around 700. They'll work really well at 600. They'll work well at 500. They'll work well at 400. They may not work that well at 300. At 300 calories a pound, you may not be able to eat enough to sustain your body weight optimally. You may be really on the really thin range, and we may find that at 300 calories a pound, a lot of women get so thin that they lose their fertility. Wouldn't surprise me at all. So we aim somewhere in our area around 500, 600, but 700 now is safer than I thought. So I want to just briefly step through the foods that everybody's so concerned about. So people are concerned about fruit because of its high sugar, but it's about 300 calories a pound. They're very worried about potatoes. The potatoes are 375 calories a pound. Rice is 500. You start to see that all of the starches range from the squashes and oatmeal down around 300 up to the rices and grains around 500. In other words, they are all below the fulcrum point of 700 calories a pound. So we can see that there's no reason for us to be worried about restricting these. Undoubtedly, in the history of America and the discussion about potatoes and weight, what confused people is if people eat a lot of potatoes, they tend to eat a lot of gravy, and they also eat a lot of sour cream and a lot of butter. When you put those things on your potatoes, it isn't the potato that's making somebody fat. It's all the fat that they're putting on the potato. So, but we can see the basic logic that it is calorie density isn't the only factor here. It's just by far the major factor. So there's other factors, for example, whether the food is cooked, whether the food has been pulverized into a powder and reconstituted. In other words, a food that has been ground up, like a smoothie, for example, a fruit smoothie, is not the same thing as the whole fruit. It's close, but it is actually a more efficient mechanism for getting calories than the whole fruit. And therefore, it's effectively probably 10 to 12% more calorie dense. So a smoothie is really at 330 calories a pound, where the whole fruit or fruit salad would be 300. Obviously, neither one of those is a problem because the fulcrum is at 700. So this is, the conversion ratios and rates about what is converted into what in the body. Those things are being worked out better all the time by research. So carbohydrate will in fact convert into fat. It won't convert as efficiently as fat will convert into fat, but it will convert. And that's why a lot of vegans, when they eat a high carbohydrate diet that is processed carbohydrate, bread, crackers, popcorn is essentially a very dried carbohydrate at 1,400 calories a pound. These are ways to keep weight on people. And those carbohydrates will convert at some level of efficiency into fat. So if we are eating a diet, even if it's carbohydrates, which are very friendly to the body in terms of their general toxicity, so they can be very healthy, like a healthy bread can be a healthy food. But the problem is it can be 1,700 calories a pound because it's very dry and it's also pulverized. And so these are ways for healthy, conscious vegans to be carrying extra weight on themselves and be sometimes mystified as to why, because they believe they're eating very healthy food. They are eating healthy food at a biochemical level, but they're not eating the optimal food or the best strategy for optimum weight. So those are some of the issues that I think everybody's getting clearer and clearer on as we go forward.
Well, great. Thank you so much. So one of the things people were also concerned about on the summit was this concept of nutrient density. Mm-hmm. And so somebody had posted on the Facebook page a bag of these Murasaki sweet potatoes, which are my favorite. You can get them at Trader Joe's. Mm-hmm. They're delicious. They're similar to the Japanese sweet potatoes that the longest lived people, the Okinawans, eat something like 72% of their calories from. The whole 3-pound bag has less than 1,200 calories. I eat a whole bag a day. It's less calories than a bag of M&Ms at the movie theater. And this person was all freaked out because some blog, wasn't even a medical blog, was like, oh, these don't have as much nutrients as the orange ones, and so I can't eat them anymore. And so we got a question from a really sharp guy who's watching named Rithvik. He's a college student. He's 21 years old. He's a big fan of yours, and he is a hyper-conscientious nutcase, self-professed. And he says, Dr. Lisle, it's amazing to me to see everyone worried about developing all sorts of deficiencies like fatty acid deficiency, protein deficiency, calcium deficiency, etc., even though there are no documented cases of these in the scientific literature. Or they're always worried that they're not getting all the nutrients they need, when in fact the real problem is we live in a country where people are suffering and dying from diseases of dietary excesses. I remember you saying somewhere that our brains are evolutionarily designed specifically to fear and worry about deficiencies, not excesses, and I found your insight into this fascinating. Could you please talk about this? And then maybe I'll also talk about why we don't have to be worried about what color the sweet potato is.
Why bark when you have a dog? This young man said it exactly right. This is I just love to hear these words coming from somebody else. Yes, hopefully the echo chamber has started. Yes, we don't need to worry about deficiencies. There's one deficiency that John McDougall worries about, which is B12. There's two deficiencies that Dr. Alan Goldhammer worries about, which are B12 and vitamin D. And past that, you don't really have any evidence to be worried about much of anything. So let me think about how to say this. The body's beautifully designed to deal with nutrient quote deficiencies. In other words, it will, if it turns out that somehow by chance your diet is relatively low in some nutrient, the DNA knows how to go about recycling and conserving that nutrient so that you don't wind up with a deficiency. So the only real deficiency that human beings ever had to be concerned about would have been just enough food. That was the problem. And so I do believe that the human mind is designed to be worried about essentially being deficient in food. It has a hunger drive, and it has a very strong predilection to be thinking and scheming about food. Now, I believe that sort of culturally, it's easy to translate that worry about getting enough food into getting enough worrying about constituencies of food. So ever since we started learning about that there's constituent parts of food, that everybody's been worried about those constituent parts. In the last 150 years, the discovery of protein and then finally vitamins, this has now got people obsessed about getting enough. The young man is correct. You don't need to be worried about getting enough. The fascination with nutrient density to me is totally misplaced. I believe that you could eat what we would consider a very nutrient deficient diet, quote unquote, and be fine. The issue is, I think, for example, a diet of just potatoes would be outstanding. And then if you fed America just potatoes, people would get way healthier than they are now. And any nutrient deficiencies that would result would be few and far between, and they would be minor. So this is, and obviously you could get rid of those deficiencies by throwing in a stalk of broccoli every now and then it's over. It's not even close to a problem. So this is the problem that we have is a natural problem being mapped onto modern knowledge. In other words, a natural problem of worried about deficiency in general, of starvation. And then we map it onto starvation for vitamin B, for B12, for B6, for C, for E, for D, for whatever it is. Essential fatty acids. Okay, pretty soon the hyperconscientious nutcases are worried about deficiencies in everything. They're worried about deficiencies of purple phytochemicals, for God's sake. So we got to make sure that we get enough of those. This is just totally ridiculous. It's understandable. In other words, I understand the nature of the psychology that is driving it, but it's misplaced. This is what I call looking for health in all the wrong places. The place you want to look for health is, as the young man suggested, getting rid of dietary excesses, essentially reestablishing appropriate natural balances to your diet. When the diet is way out of balance, then there can be problems. But people's diets now, the balance problem is not deficiency. The balance problem is excesses, chiefly of excess calories. So excess calories in general is actually probably the biggest single problem, and I believe excesses of animal protein as well as heated oils are probably the other problems that are causing imbalances in metabolic process and resulting in health compromise.
Nice. Thank you. Dr. McDougall had said on the summit that there's never been a documented case of fatty acid deficiency, but we have a young lady, Tammy, asking, do we need to supplement with DHA and EPA?
I think that it may be possible that if you were to be eating an extraordinarily lean diet, in other words, you just ate super lean, super low fat foods, and potatoes, and I don't know, maybe asparagus, and fruit. If you had an extraordinarily lean diet that never touched an avocado and never touched a nut of any kind, would it be possible when you didn't eat any oats, because oats have about 15% fat? So if you had an extraordinarily low fat diet, do I think it might be possible that you might be able to get some small minor league symptoms of not essential fatty acid deficiency per se, but that you would function better if you had a little bit more? Yeah, that's possible. And so what would you do then if you really didn't want to eat a nut or an avocado and you didn't want to eat any oatmeal? Well, you could take a little bit of flaxseed and put it in a coffee grinder and then sprinkle it on your salad. Okay, if you did that, if you took a teaspoon of that a day and did that, that would solve any and all possible essential fatty acid deficiencies that would ever come up. So that's a solution. I don't do such a thing because I'll eat a few nuts and I'll eat a few avocados and I'll eat oatmeal. So I'm not worried about it.
Yeah, I think the real problem is the worrying about it. I haven't added any fat to my diet in 7.5 years, but there's a blood test that I get every year at my annual physical called the Essential Fatty Acid Profile, and it just keeps getting better and better. But I do eat oats. So, but Dr. McDougall talked about that KON potato study where somebody ate nothing but a couple actually ate nothing but potatoes for an entire year, and they actually had to add oil to it because they couldn't get enough calories, and they had no nutritional deficiencies. So.
Right.
Yeah,
that makes sense. That makes sense. In other words, it's very hard to engineer a deficiency. The real health problems are excesses. So, but deficiencies are the worry. That's the natural worry of the species. As you can imagine, no animal in nature evolved a worry for having eaten too much. But every animal in nature has a constant, omnipresent fear of not getting enough. And so that's why we see the fascination with, this is how you get Prevention Magazine. This is how you get the supplement aisle at the health food store that drives the vast majority of, that's the most profitable place in the store. So you can imagine that this is also what drives the literature in the health arena. What's driving it is everybody's worried about deficiencies, just deficiency worry. I'm going to... when they bury me, okay, there will still be a crushing fear of deficiency in a society that is massively overfed, and that's because we will never be able to pull this concept out by the root, because it's rooted in human natural history, and we're designed to be making this mistake.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. So this next question came from many people watching the summit, and I just want everyone to know that when I ask this question, it's not because I'm trying to put one doctor against the other or be in a camp or disrespect anything that was said on the summit, but it did create a lot of confusion, and that is back to nuts. And again, this is deficiency. So we have two ways to look at it. First of all, some of the speakers were strongly believing that we need nuts just for health, just for survival. Without them, we will die prematurely and be more at risk for things like Alzheimer's, heart disease, and strokes. And so that created some fear in people that had trouble eating nuts because they found, because remember, this was the Real Truth About Weight Loss Summit, and there are people like myself that find that we could not lose weight with nuts or even with any added fat. And so it created a lot of fear in people. So this is a twofold question. Do you believe that we absolutely have to eat them for optimal health, or we will die sooner of heart disease, dementia, and stroke? And how do you feel about them for weight loss? Or is it okay to be on a no added fat diet? And I'd like, because this is what people worry about.
Right. Okay. First of all, about the first part is whether or not nuts are useful in terms of reducing your risk with respect to heart disease, et cetera. No, they're not. So they're no better and no worse than any other whole natural food. So the notion that the nuts have any documented protective effect over and above the fact that they would replace, in some people's diets, they would replace, for example, meat and cheese and so forth. So as a result of, if a person has a high net consumption, they are going to be eating foods that are going to be, they're now going to be subtracting out other rich foods out of their diet. And the rich foods that they're going to be subtracting out are going to be steak and cheese. So you have to statistically control for that fact when you look at any of this evidence. When you look at the evidence from a more comprehensive scientific perspective, you'll find that there's no evidence for any special powers of nuts to help you with respect to vascular disease, for example. So that's a misunderstanding. I actually know the research that people are excited about there, and I understand how it is that an individual could come to that conclusion by looking at that research, but that's because that analysis has not been done in a comprehensive fashion from the standpoint of statistical inference. And when you, as a former stats professor, I looked at that question carefully, and the answer is definitive. There is no evidence at all. In fact, it's more strong than that. In other words, the evidence is quite substantial. In other words, the question has been looked at quite carefully, and there is sufficient enough precision in the ability to analyze the problem, because there has been so much data collected on the problem, that there is no question that there is no special power of nuts. Okay, so it's not simply that I can say that there's no evidence to support it. I can say that there is tremendous evidence that makes it very clear that there is no special utility of nuts to help your cardiovascular health. Okay, so that problem we can put away. Now, the next question was about nuts and weight. Nuts are a high calorie density food. They are the highest. Nuts and seeds are about 2,500 calories a pound typically. So they are the highest calorie dense food in nature for humans. And so actually, I think in nature in general, I don't believe that there's anything else in nature that, I don't believe wood for termites is higher calorie density. In other words, wood, I think, should be, it's probably 1,000 calories a pound if you're a termite. So, because wood wouldn't have fat in it the way that nuts and seeds do. So I believe that actually, if we start thinking about whale blubber, that's going to be probably, if you're a shark and you eat whale blubber, that's probably higher calorie density than nuts. All right, so I'll quit speculating about different calorie densities. The truth is that nuts and seeds are going to be the highest calorie density plant food that you're ever going to have the opportunity to eat. As we would expect, then we wouldn't expect them to be immune from the fact that the higher calorie density the foodstuffs are, the more fat the animal will store on its body. So as a result, we would expect that if you add nuts to somebody's diet, that their overall fat profile is going to increase. And that's how that's going to work. So if you eat a few nuts a day, then we would expect, all other things being equal, we would expect you to be have slightly more fat on you. Now, let's suppose that you eat an ounce of nuts a day because you're worried about some kind of a nut deficiency problem. If you were to do that, that would be little enough nuts that the ability to detect a difference in your body weight would be very difficult to do. And after a year of such a practice, we might find that you're only 1 pound heavier. And that may be what it is that you sit at, indefinitely, if that's your practice. If you add 2 ounces of nuts, it might change. It might be 2 pounds heavier, or it might be 4. We don't know. Okay, so now we start to wind up with interactions with your personal genetics, and it would be impossible to determine. But we would know, for example, if we were to take 100 people and we would suddenly have them each eating 2 ounces of nuts a day, where they had previously not eaten so, we would find that statistically the average a year later, those people would be heavier. They would be a little bit fatter. Probably not a lot, because that would be a lot of food, but it would be enough. It would increase the average calorie density of their diet, because the calorie density of nobody's diet is 2,500 calories a pound. So even somebody that's eating trash with both hands, their calorie density of their diet is probably 1,200 calories a pound. So if you add a little bit of nuts, we're going to start dragging it up to 1,300, and we're going to add a little bit of body fat. So that's the story on nuts. I have no objection to nuts. I will tell people that if they are overweight and they're attempting to lose weight and get very fit, that may be one thing that they're probably going to want to sacrifice, or at least largely so, along with any other high calorie density food that they're eating or processed food. In no circumstances would I ever tell somebody that they needed to eat nuts in order to reduce their vascular threat. That's a misunderstanding that hopefully we can lay that one to rest.
Well, people are still worrying not just about the stroke risk or heart disease risk, but the dementia risk and the longevity risk, because that's what they're being told. Debbie's saying she started skipping nuts, and in 2 weeks she can tell the difference. But do you think that weight loss is the same for everyone? So in other words, are there people that just will lose weight quicker and easier without the fat? Because if you're eating fat, I mean, isn't it easier for your body to take the fat if you're not eating fat from your body? Does that make a difference?
I don't think of it that way. You just think of it as overall calorie density balance. So it's not about whether you're eating fat or not eating fat per se. It's about whether or not the overall calorie density issue is involved, and also how much a person is eating. So our point here, you can lose weight eating a very high fat diet if you eat 2 bits of it and then you wire your jaw shut and you feel like you're starving to death. You can do this, and people do such a thing. What we want to do, AJ, is you and I have always talked, is we want to lose weight without losing your mind. Yeah, you want to simply eat a calorie density balance of your diet that is consistent with your natural history, so it feels very comfortable, that you're not fighting the hunger drive, and yet the calorie density of the diet is low enough that it's probably 700 or lower, which means it's basically full of whole natural foods and not a lot of rich foods in that arena, so that we wind up getting lean and fit, and yet we're comfortable. So that's the issue is not actually like Dr. Alan Goldhamer's diet at True North is actually a little higher fat than the McDougall diet, interestingly enough. So Alan's a little looser on some of the fat content. And yet both of those diets will work fine, just because they're both within the parameters of the natural history of the species. So I'm not too worried about some of the fine details here. I'm interested in getting the big picture right. If we get the big picture right, we'll be fine.
It just, the people that I work with that lost weight not eating nuts, when they reintroduced them, they all gained weight. And so I think of somebody like myself who hasn't had a nut seed avocado in 7.5 years.
Yes.
I started including them because I was worried I was going to die prematurely or get dementia. I would have to take something else out of my diet. And I'm thinking, I don't want to. I mean, I don't want to eat less potatoes or less sweet potatoes or less rice. So it just seems that when you're eating foods of a higher caloric density, you can't eat as much food. Yeah.
So however, you're designed by nature to be comfortable. The higher calorie density foods impact satiety mechanisms more intensively than lower calorie density foods. So as a result, yeah, you would be able to eat less food if you eat foods of higher calorie density, but you'd be satisfied in doing so. The problem begins when the overall calorie density of the diet gets to be higher than that of our natural history, at which point the satiety mechanisms aren't going off soon enough. And so you can only compensate so far for a diet that is very overly high in terms of its calorie density. The system won't allow you to be comfortable on 1 pound of food a day if it's 2,000 calories a pound food. So, for example, a peanut butter jelly sandwich is 2,000 calories a pound, and most women burn about 2,000 calories a pound. if they were to eat 1 pound a day of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, they would not be completely satisfied. Now, they'd be close, and they wouldn't notice it from day to day. But what they would discover they were doing, if we watched them very carefully, is that they probably start eating 2,200, 2,300 calories a day. So they wouldn't actually be completely satisfied on the 2,000. Whereas if we dial the food away from the peanut butter jelly sandwiches and take them back to 700 calorie pound fare instead of 2,000 calorie pound fare, now they're eating almost 3 pounds of food a day. Now they're comfortable, and they're not finding themselves reaching for an extra 200 or 300 calories. So that's the issue. The issue is essentially calorie density.
So everything comes down to calorie density. It's
it really does.
That about the higher calorie food, because Dr. Shintani, who actually, I don't know if you know this, it was so fascinating. He bought Dr. McDougall's practice for $1. He was just wonderful to meet. He said that people feel more satisfied with fat because of the greater caloric density. That's not that there's anything specially satiating about fat. It's just that it's a higher caloric dense food.
Right. So, for example, you would feel more satiated on 1 ounce of fat than you would on 1 ounce of carbohydrate. Okay, but the issue is that's really, he is correct there, but that's not the fundamental issue that we're looking at. The question is whether we are more satisfied on half a pound of food or a quarter of a pound of food. And the answer is, well, it gets complicated. Okay, we have to now add in the calorie density, because if it's a quarter pound of fat versus a half a pound of carbohydrate, it's going to start to get close. That's what's going to happen. But what we'll find is that if the overall calorie density of the diet starts creeping up past 700, what we're going to find is that people will start to systematically overeat. And that's what being fat is. Having excess fat is a result of the systematic overeating. The person, in other words, just, I don't believe in the conscious regulation of food intake. I think that that's an absurd concept. Weighing and measuring, etc., just doesn't make any sense to me. It's not done by any animal in the animal kingdom, and it was never done by humans until the 20th century. So the concept of needing to consciously monitor your food intake is as ludicrous as the notion of being able to consciously monitor your oxygen intake. So we don't want to be in the game. You can do both, by the way. You can pay attention to your breathing all day long and try to not take a deep breath. You could do such a thing, but it wouldn't do you any good in the long run, because pretty soon you're going to slip into unconscious consumption of oxygen. In the same way is true of your food. So you can be fastidious as all hell, but sooner or later you're going to slip into unconscious consumption. And so it's really going to be whether or not the nature of those materials, the nature of the food, enables you to unconsciously regulate accurately. And that's really what the issue is. And so the issue is your diet higher than it should be naturally in terms of its calorie density? If it is, you better have good genes, or you better have genes that can manage that, or else you're going to get excess weight.
I love how you said on episode 161 of the Beat Your Genes podcast that only 1% of people that are thin earned it, and that people that have never had this problem do not understand the difficulty of it. I thought, I mean, all your work is great, but episode 161, if they gave Oscars for podcasts, that episode everybody must listen to. I've listened to it 7 times. I'm not kidding. It's brilliant. So everyone, please listen to that. Also, please stay till the end of the broadcast, because Dr. Lisle and I actually have an announcement that we'd like to tell you. So just to recap, if I got this right, nuts are a whole natural food. They're healthy, but they're of a high caloric density. And if somebody wants to eat them, it's fine, but they don't have to feel like they must eat them for longevity or prevention of any of these diseases. And that good carbohydrates are not evil, as a lot of people feel that nuts are this superior superfood and that we should be eating those instead of things like potatoes, rice, etc.
Right. All correct, AJ. You've got it.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to get to a question that came in because we had some speakers. Well, first of all, no one said caffeine was good on the summit. It's just a degree of some thought it was actually worse than others in the reason. So we had a question. Dr. Lisle, what is it with coffee What is the attraction to it? And why am I having difficulties letting go of it? I really do not even like the taste. I switched to decaf for 3 days so far, and suggestions of alternatives. And so people are having a really hard time letting go of caffeine, and it's not a health food. So take it away.
Right. What caffeine does, I mean, there's a multitude of effects of caffeine, but the couple of effects that we're interested in is that there's a specific neurotransmitter, adenosine, I believe is the name of it, that causes you, as it builds up inside your mind, as you go through the day, it causes you to feel sleepy. That's its job. In other words, it's a signaling mechanism. Yeah, it's essentially like, let me think about this. Let's suppose that there's many such mechanisms in nature, but let's suppose you had a device on your car that could measure the dirtiness of your oil. And so we don't have that yet, but that could be coming in the future. That as your oil gets dirtier and dirtier from the work that it does to try to keep your engine clear and lubricated, that as it gets dirtier, you find a little meter goes on and tells you that your oil is getting too dirty, and now we've got too many particles in there, and now the oil is not able to do its job to stop the wear and tear from the little particles that are circulating in the oil from debris. Well, your brain also gets dirty. So the longer you run your brain in a day, you're essentially dirtying up the oil. And as a result, what's going to happen is you need to have a device to tell you that your brain is dirty, that it's essentially polluted. And that device is adenosine. Or you know what? Somebody's going to say that idiot doesn't know how to pronounce it. I don't know how to pronounce it. But the point is that it's a neurotransmitter that is a signaling device to tell you that your brain's dirty. And the way you fix your brain, the way you get your brain clean, is to go to sleep. And that's what happens when you sleep. It's a time for your brain to clean out. And it does a bunch of other things. Sleep does a bunch of other things that we now understand that we didn't know 20 years ago. But a chief mechanism of sleeping is the cleaning of the brain. And so when you use caffeine, it blocks the action of adenosine. That's what it does. So you don't feel it. So you don't feel sleepy even though your brain's dirty. So you can see what kind of a problem this is. This is the equivalent of if you have a sprained ankle, that I give you a painkiller in your ankle so that you can't feel the sprain. So you walk on a foot that's damaged when naturally you wouldn't be walking on it. Now, we can all see a reason why this could be useful. So for example, if the Romans are attacking your fort, and it's incredibly important that you stay awake and you don't, that as a sentry, then you could see where coffee would be a good idea, because it would keep you awake, even though your nervous system was telling you that your brain was dirty and you should go to sleep. You could make use of that, except you have a perfectly good chemical for that anyway. It's called adrenaline. So when you have a pressure at work or some big thing, and yet you're short of sleep, that's okay. If depending upon how important the issue is, your nervous system will kick out sufficient adrenaline to keep you awake to the appropriate amount of time to run a cost benefit on how important is the issue versus how important is the sleep. And when the brain becomes sufficiently dirty, when you've gone 22 hours and your presentation's 4 hours from now, it will finally have you go to sleep, even though it's very hard for you to go to sleep because you're full of adrenaline. But the mind will be brilliant at finding that cutting point and deciding, you know what, your brain is too dirty, you're now becoming dysfunctional, go to sleep. Okay? Now, however, you could subvert that with coffee, and you could block the action of that, and now what's going to happen is you'll wind up with compromised abilities, and it's an inefficient way to go. So what's happening? So that's one thing that's going on. So people don't like the feeling in the morning that they're short of sleep. They're short of sleep because for various and sundry reasons, the electric light bulb and interesting things to look at it on lit screens have kept them up past an appropriate bedtime. Now they're short of sleep. and now they feel sleepy. Their brain's dirty. They're starting out the day with a dirty brain. And so what are they going to do? And some of our brains are dirtier than others. AJ. But the point is that you're starting out the day with a dirty brain and it doesn't feel good. And you're being encouraged to go to sleep by your biology. So what do? We go to Starbucks and we block the action of adenosine. And now you feel better, but actually you're operating on a dirty brain. This is, this isn't the greatest way to live. It's effectively artificial adrenaline. And is it terrible? No. It's also addictive. In other words, once you do this over and over again, the brain obviously gets used to it and anticipates that it's going to have it, and then builds up defenses against it because it wants to operate around any kind of chemical action like this, whether it's morphine, heroin, nicotine, or it's caffeine. Which the brain will try to wrap its way around and figure out a way how to defend itself against it. And as a result, we wind up with tolerance. And so then what's going to happen is if you frustrate the system by not giving it the drug when it expects, you're going to go into withdrawal. It's not going to be pleasant. So withdrawal effects are going to keep people in the trap. And it's going to be sometimes hard to break an addictive cycle like that. That's the pleasure trap. Caffeine is a minor league version of the pleasure trap. It's not particularly damaging. It's, now we're getting a discussion between myself and my co-author. Alan could recite for you a litany of evils associated with caffeine. I won't. In other words, on the grand scheme of things, this is what I call one of the minor sins. So it's a little bit of a problem, but it's not nearly as big a problem as a cheese sandwich.
Wow. Okay. It's just on the summit, we had some doctors giving some evidence why it can cause people to store body fat. And since this was a weight loss summit, trying to give people other tools that think places to look, if they were still struggling. But it does seem to be difficult for people.
That's interesting, AJ. I never thought of that, and never occurred to me that would be true. So this is information I've never heard before. I can see the possibility of a chain reaction looking as follows. I could see how research might suggest that would be true through the possibility of chronically sleep depriving people behind caffeine use. When people are chronically sleep deprived, they are less active and less likely to exercise. And they're probably more likely to reach for stimulating foods. So I can see that caffeine use would be more comprehensively and subtly disruptive to healthy living, and as a result, thereby contributing to weight gain. But how caffeine specifically would act on that's outside my knowledge.
Okay. Well, I'm going to see if I can get you a copy of that talk. Maybe you would look at it, and
sure.
That would be awesome. So while you were talking, I Googled the calorie density of whale blubber and wood. Just so you know, if you're trying to lose weight, you'd be better off eating wood because it's less than 1 kcal per gram. They said it's between 0 and 1. Whale blubber, on the other hand, is 247 calories per ounce, or 3,952 calories per pound. So it's right up there with oil. It's 100% fat. So we don't recommend it.
Fabulous. Now we know.
Definitely don't recommend it. Yeah. So there was a comment live. I can't find it right now, but this is the same thing as one of the questions we have. Somebody was talking about cravings. And for that, I actually recommend they watch your cram circuit lecture, which is available both on my YouTube page and Dr. McDougall's site. But this lady says, this is a question about self-sabotage. Dr. Lisle, dear Dr. Lisle, I find I sabotage myself several times a week with salty tortilla chips and guacamole, or eating out where oil and salt are embedded in the food. What are good ways to work on self-sabotaging? I would just say don't eat out.
Yeah. I mean, she's asking the question. It's a good question, but I can't give you a snappy answer because the truth is that the problem is comprehensive. That's why Alan and I wrote a 240-page book on that problem. You're designed by nature to seek out the richest food in the environment, and so you're designed to actually run a cost benefit on how much energy you're going to put out to seek out how rich a food. So you can imagine, for example, the following scenario. If somebody has a fruit salad in front of you, but over 20 feet away, somebody's baking up some potatoes and beans, and you're sufficiently hungry, you're just not feeling like nibbling on something. You actually want something more substantial. So the fruit salad doesn't have the richness of the potatoes and beans that are being cooked, and so you find yourself drawn to, and you'll get up off your duff and walk over there and see if you can get some of that. Okay, that would make sense. The higher calorie density will draw you to put out physical action in order to get it. Now, let's suppose that there's a tree on the other side of the river that grows Snickers bars. So it's a Snickers tree. And the Snickers bar tree, that's 2,500 calories a pound on the Snickers bars. And you have traded with the people down on the other side of the river from time to time. It's a 17-mile hike to get to a crossing, but you could in fact swim across the river. Now you're not, the river is pretty cold, so it's kind of unpleasant, but that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is that there's piranhas in the river. So question is, you might get lucky that you've seen animals swim the river and not get attacked by the piranhas, but you've also seen some animals in the river that did get attacked by the piranhas. So now the question is, you can see that the Snickers bars are in fact in season. You can look across the 40-yard river and you can see that they're there, and they're nice brown wrappers with the blue lettering, I think. So the question is, will you swim the river to get a Snickers bar? And the answer is no, you're not. So are you tempted? Yes, you might be tempted. You don't want to even let your children know what a Snickers bar is like, because you don't want them going in the river after this forgetting about the piranhas. So the question is not how it is that you sort of get rid of this tendency, because you're going to be drawn to high calorie density foods for the rest of your life. That's just part of the nature of all animals to do that. Question is, will you work hard enough at setting up your environment to make it statistically less likely for you to act on that very often? This is what AJ is talking about. Don't go out to dinner, which means you want to have competitive food already in the house that's easily available, so that when you have the impulse to taste tortilla chips and beans and guacamole, then you've got it already at home. So you've got tortillas there, and you've got beans there, and you've got avocados there, and you may have some low sodium salsa there. So you can actually get that taste, and it's going to take you 10 minutes or so to get that all together. But you could do that and make that competitive. So even though going out has a lure, that it's saltier and it's richer and it's fatter, and that you don't have to do anything except sit, and there's a pleasant ambiance of people around talking. In other words, there's margaritas. In other words, there's things that will also draw you there. But what we want to do is to make it as competitive as possible to make healthy choices. And so you start by setting up your environment in a way so that healthy choices are highly competitive with the pleasure trap. And in doing so, you make a chance for you to get in a nice groove.
Great. Thank you. So we have a question from somebody watching live. I took a screenshot because I can't see worth a darn anymore, from Brooke. And the part that I'm really interested in is the last sentence, because I hear this a lot. But she's saying, "Hi, Chef AJ. I really wanted to ask you a few questions, but I'm going to have you answer. I've lost an amazing 80 pounds following your book, but I also used intermittent fasting where I ate only in a 4-hour window, usually from 6 to 10. However, I know I need to have more of a gap between finished eating and sleeping. My problem is that once I start eating, I can't stop." So she's afraid if she starts earlier in the day, she won't stop. Like if I was answering this question, I'd say that that's a ridiculous window, and that's what's making her not be able to stop, because even Dr. Goldhammer said he is really against this 1 meal a day phenomenon, that people are having such a narrow window. But I hear this a lot from people, so I can't discount that even people eating whole natural food without the nuts and the avocado, that they feel like they can't stop eating. When I talk to them, it's usually because their starch is too low and they're trying to just fill up on on fruits and vegetables. So what do you say to Brooke? What do you say to these people that claim that on the diet we recommend, they just can't stop eating once they start?
Yeah, I would. I think you've got all these little elements in that, in what you just said. You talked about a lot of things. We've got a conditioned cram circuit. So I would suggest that person go back and watch that webinar that I did with, I think that was Gustavo back in the fall of 17. I think this one that was, I can't remember. That should be on the McDougall website. So she's conditioned a cram circuit by every night she's eating a great deal in a short window. What do I think about intermittent fasting? Not necessary, not particularly useful. I think the utility of intermittent fasting as a concept, when people have used it and it seems to have worked, has been predominantly to chop off a conditioned cram circuit kind of accidentally, is how that's worked. So years ago, when I was a youngster, I read a book by Dr. Wayne Dyer, and I don't remember which it was. It might have been Your Erroneous Zones, or it might have been Pulling Your Own Strings. I can't remember. It might have been a third one. But he said something in there that struck me as real useful, and that's, he said, first, be a good animal. And I thought, good for him. I mean, this was before I knew much. I knew a little bit about nutrition at the time, but not much. But basically, he said, eat healthy foods, eat when you feel like eating. Don't eat when you don't feel like eating. Go to sleep, get some exercise, etc. What he's really was speaking to is the notion of get in a decent balance. And so that's how I would inform you about how to deal with this. What I would suggest to somebody that's trapped in an unusual thing like this gal's doing, if she's eating 4 hours a day, and she's probably eating pretty intensively those 4 hours a day, if it's working for you and you're comfortable with it, then I'm not too interested in disturbing it. I'm not interested in telling you that it's the wrong way to do things. It's a way to do things. And if you're comfortable and it's successful, as long as you're eating healthy foods, then this is not a problem. It seems to me that you might be more comfortable distributing your calories out across the day and not eating so intensively in one shot. Maybe, maybe not. Most people are more comfortable eating 2 or 3 times a day, maybe more. And as long as you are eating whole natural foods, to be a good animal and simply follow your instincts as far as that goes. You don't need to be pushing your food within a feeding window. That doesn't make any sense. I want to point out that would be inconsistent with animal history. You won't see animals do this. They don't eat in feeding windows. The koala bears don't say, oh, it's 2 p.m, that's it, we're done. They just don't do this. Okay. So they follow a natural rhythm. So try to establish for yourself a natural rhythm. And that's how I would tell you to go about that problem.
Okay. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question before the big announcement. It's from Kiki, who's watching live. She says, do you believe in this new disorder of orthorexia? Because so many of us that eat this way, we're told that there's something wrong.
I think orthorexia, that's the notion that people are just overly fascinated and worried about what it is that they're eating. Isn't that what that?
I'll Google it, but I think it's conscientiousness, or maybe they feel like it's an eating disorder because we're so focused on what we eat and what we don't eat.
Right. I think that's what it is. Now, what do I think about that?
Would you like a definition of it? I'm just Googling it right now.
Okay.
It's saying it's a term for a condition that includes symptoms of obsessive behavior in pursuit of a healthy diet. Orthorexia sufferers often displayed signs and symptoms of anxiety disorders that frequently co-occur with anorexia nervosa or other eating disorders.
Yes, you can describe a lot of these behaviors under the umbrella of OCD. And so OCD is and we can call that a disorder because it's you call something a disorder because it's causing you more trouble than it's helping you. So that's what we call a disorder. So we call something a substance abuse disorder when the use of the substance is now got the person's life out of balance to the level that they're not just having a glass of wine now and then, but they've got a problem with alcohol. So now we call it a disorder. So the gods of psychiatry decree that something is a disorder when it's, essentially more trouble than it would be worth. You would choose not to have it. Let me give you an example of another disorder. So, and some of these disorders are clearly sort of genetically problematic or otherwise pretty serious business. So if you have schizophrenia, that's called a formal thought disorder, and that's pretty rough. Okay, that's a disorder. What they'll call disorders is a matter of a committee. Okay, so now we've decided that there's a committee of that where they say, okay, we're dealing with people that seem to be overly obsessive about the health of their food. Well, if you were to have something that anybody would call a disorder, that would appear to be about the most useful disorder that one could have. Okay. And the fact that there may be a sort of overweight, self-indulgent wine connoisseur physician on the other side of this diagnosing it may be rather entertaining for some of us that are taking a 1,000-foot view and looking down on this scene. So I would say that it would be essentially appropriate for people today to be somewhat, what do they call it, orthorexic. In other words, we should all be more conscious and cognizant of our food choices and the impact on our health than we are as a population. Now, is it useful to say that there are people where it looks like the benefit from doing so is greater than the cost, or that the cost is greater than the benefit? Yeah, I think there is. In the same way that there's people that are concerned about germs on their hands, which is a legitimate thing to be concerned about, but they're overly concerned and they wash their hands too much. And we would call that obsessive compulsive disorder with a germ phobia. Okay, yeah, I don't deny that we can say that this is a OCD variant. It's an extraordinarily benign OCD variant. We wouldn't treat it. The last thing we're going to do is have somebody, we could treat it. We would try to treat it with knowledge. And that's one of the things that I try to do is I try to explain to people that healthy living is a very good thing, but hyper healthy living is probably not going to benefit you very much past healthy living, if at all. So that it's useful to actually, a cure for orthorexia is knowledge. So knowledge of understanding that subtle variances in behavior in the health arena are not going to have any appreciable, measurable impact, whereas large differences will. So don't get, in the same way that OCD people need to learn that if they wash their hands 6 or 8 times a day, they're not going to get deathly ill, but they're washing them 25 times a day. And so they're actually chafing their hands, and they're going to be better off if they don't. They also need to, knowledge is power there, and they need to learn and experience that they can loosen the reins a little bit and be okay. So yeah, you could give this a name if you wanted to. I would just call it, I have my own name for it, hyperconscientious nutcase. And it turns out that my hyperconscientious nutcases are very often in and around food. And I try to talk them off the ledge and realize that if somehow a Frito sneaks into their mouth every now and then, that this is not a disaster and they're not going to die from it. And it's also true that that very often they're not just hyper conscientious about that, but they're hyper conscientious about other things as well. They tend to be extremely responsible people in many dimensions, and have a fair amount of anxiety about being perfectionistic. So this all goes under the hat of perfectionism, and you will see perfectionism not only in orthorexia, you'll see it in anorexia, you'll see it in bulimia, and you will also see it in hand washers and people that check the stove 50 times before they leave the house. This is a characteristic of my people near and dear to my heart, hyper-conscientious nutcases, who I happen to be surrounded by in my life, in my career.
And talking to one right now. Well, that's great, Dr. Lisle. It's almost as if with this hyper-conscientious eating, we've gone full circle, because we started out talking about nuts and nutrient density, which is sort of an example of that, something
yes.
to be worried
about. Correct. Beautiful. That's right, Angel.
That's great. Well, you guys, I have a really big announcement. So if you really enjoyed talking to Dr. Lisle and having your questions answered by him, what if you could do that on a weekly basis? So what happened is I recently taught a 13-week class based on my book, The Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss. And one of the weeks I was speaking on the Holistic Holiday at Sea Cruise. And while I had internet, I couldn't trust that it would be good enough to give a 1-hour talk in the middle of the ocean. And so I asked Dr. Lisle to fill in for me, and the class went nuts, and they loved having him as a guest speaker, and they said, could Dr. Lisle please do this? Well, I asked him, and he doesn't have 12 weeks of his life to do this, but he said he would consider doing a 6-week course based on his book, The Pleasure Trap. And I'm going to just put a link right here where you can register. Now, this class will be limited because we can only get a certain amount of people on this technology, but it's really reasonably priced. It's less than $100 for 6 weeks of having Dr. Lisle teach this master class of escaping the pleasure trap based on his book. You'll get a PDF of the book, and you'll get to be with him for 6 consecutive Monday evenings at 5 p.m. Pacific time, starting on Monday, April 22nd. Part of it will be lecture based on the book, and part of it will be Q&A. But what's really great is that he is going to include material that he didn't have when he wrote the book. So it's going to be a fabulous class. We have so many people registered already because we did open it first to the people in the class, and almost all of them signed up. So I hope you guys will check it out, because I'm taking it, because what could be a better way to spend Monday night? So thank you so much for doing this, Dr. Lisle. It's going to be terrific.
It's just another wacky, fun AJ thing. I'm always in.
Right. So if you're a hyper-conscientious nutcase, we expect you to sign up immediately. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Lisle. It was great talking to you about these things. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Chef AJ, and I make healthy taste delicious, but Dr. Lisle makes it understandable. Don't forget to watch episode 161 of Beat Your Genes. Take care, everyone.